Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to call to order the City Commission workshop for Thursday, May 14th at 7 p.m. Can we have roll call, please?
Commissioner Drosky.
Here.
Commissioner Hudak.
Here.
Commissioner Preston.
Here.
Vice Mayor Parnas.
Here.
Mayor Gantz.
Here. If we have the Pledge of Allegiance, everyone just join me. I pledge of allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty
and justice for all.
We have approval of the agenda for tonight.
Motion to approve.
Second.
A motion by Commissioner Preston, second by Vice Mayor Parnas. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All right, I'd like to get this evening started. City Manager, would you like to start? Do you have any comments?
Yes, please, and thank you, Mayor. Good evening, City Commission. Dave Santucci, City Manager. Tonight is a long-awaited presentation about recycling. And I know that we've been waiting to do this for quite some time. We could have probably done this earlier had we not been under the circumstances that we are. But of course, nonetheless, here we are today, ready to provide you with some information regarding the city's recycling program, as well as some options that we think are feasible moving forward as it relates to the program. And so with that, I'd like to hand it over to Mr. Gressick to provide the presentation, and I will also be in participation with that as well.
Excellent. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Well, good evening, and thank you, Mr. City Manager. Good evening, Mayor, Vice Mayor, Commissioners. It's great to see everybody. For those that don't know me, my name is Chad Gressick. I'm the Director of Sustainable Management for the city. I do oversee the city's solid waste and recycling operations. Tonight, our hope is to present you with some of the latest information, provide you, as the City Manager indicated, some potential program options to consider, and ultimately to try to get some consensus on where we might be going with the program in the future. Next slide, please. So tonight's agenda, I'm going to provide a background of why we're here today. A lot of this information will be information you have seen in the past. Obviously, over the last 2 years, I have provided updates on our recycling program. I've given you information on the statistics. So this presentation will build upon those statistics and that information. As we discussed, there will be an outline of some potential alternatives to consider. Some questions, obviously, that you may have, open for public comment, and then ultimately get commission feedback on the program and on the potential options that we have put forward. Next slide, please. So over the course of 2 years, I think people have certainly seen a lot of these types of articles that are out there. I think people have certainly become a lot more educated in regards to the recycling situation. We are in Deerfield Beach and the recycling situation that's really occurring globally. As you remember from my previous presentations, this is not something that's isolated to Deerfield Beach. This is a global issue that is affecting everyone. And, it's unfortunate. It's not something that happened overnight, and it's not something that we believe is going to turn around and improve overnight as well. So again, there's a lot of information out there. We certainly, the more people understand about the issues that are facing the global recycling industry, the better. It helps understand the position the city's in, and more information, the better. Next slide, please. So just to provide a global background on why we're here today, really the impetus of the whole situation stems from a policy decision made in China in 2018, and essentially where they implemented strict regulation in regards to the importation of solid waste as raw materials. So basically what that means is they essentially turned off the switch, so to speak, where, the lion's share of the world's recyclables were going to China. And they abruptly said, no, as long as this material does not meet these criteria, you will not be able to import this material here. 70% of the U.S.'s plastics were going to China. And again, there's estimates of upwards of 80% of the world's recyclables or recyclable material were going to China. And obviously that created a huge ripple effect on the industry, the global industry that we're still feeling today. So what that did was obviously fairly abruptly revenue generation. We used to get money for the sale of our recyclables. That turned into a cost. And as surplus continued to exceed demand, those costs continued to go up as the value of those materials continued to drop. A new term was something that we were introduced to, the term contamination. That was never something that we had really paid much attention to in our program until 2018. And that basically was a term that further resulted in increased costs. When China closed their borders, basically the materials were starting to get diverted to secondary markets, Indonesia, Vietnam, and those secondary markets quickly became saturated, which only compounded the issue of the surplus and the decline in value in the materials. And then, of course, locally, the timing of all this couldn't have happened at a worst possible time for the city of Deerfield Beach, because that's when our existing recycling contracts were expiring. So we really felt this right up front and the impacts of these changes, fairly quickly. Next slide, please. So this slide of the presentation basically outlines some of the history in regards to the city's recycling program. So from the 80s up to 2013, the city was part of the Broward County resource recovery system. And throughout that whole period, there were favorable market conditions, meaning that we were getting revenue for our recyclables. In addition to that, tipping fees were extremely high back then, and there was a significant tipping fee avoidance where we weren't paying for these materials to be disposed of. So there was a strong incentive to recycle during that time frame. From 2013 to 2018, the Resource Recovery Board broke up, or the system broke up in 2013. Shortly thereafter, the city contracted with Sun Bergeron to process its recyclables. And during that period, the city received average annual revenues of $164,000. However, those revenues began decreasing starting in the year 2014. In 2016, the assets of Sun Recycling, which was part of the Sun Bergeron joint venture, were purchased by Waste Management. And in the spring and summer of 2018, our contract with Sun Bergeron was up for renewal, due in part to the breakup of the joint venture. Obviously, Sun Bergeron could not renew its existing contracts. The city did issue a bid for recycling processing, and no responses were received. The only local viable option at that time was Waste Management. That contract was put forward to the City Commission in June of 2018, and due to just the new terminology and the exorbitant increase in costs, ultimately the City Commission rejected that contract. And due to that, over the summer of 2018, the city suspended its recycling program. Over the summer of 2018 and into the fall, the city, with support and direction from the City Commission, recontacted Waste Management and tried to renegotiate a contract that was more suitable for the city, and they were able to do so. Through that renegotiation, there were some additional incentives put into the contract with Waste Management, which included some education and outreach support. They implemented some temporary contamination caps, which you will see further on in the presentation, save the city quite a bit of money. And also, through the duration of this contract, Waste Management does provide the city a $15,000 per year payment that is used for litter abatement throughout the city. Next slide, please. So in September 2018, the city did enter into this new contract with Waste Management. And as you may recall, we rolled out the DFB Recycle 2.0. And under that contract, there were various caps that were put into place to cap contamination. As you can see, there was an 18% contamination cap that had expired in February 2019, a 26% contamination cap that expired in August of 2019, and from September to today, we are now paying the actual costs of the contamination within our materials. Over that first several weeks of rolling out that program, the city implemented an extensive education and outreach program aimed to reduce contamination and improve the value of the materials that we were sending for processing, and ultimately trying to reduce the city's costs. There was a multi-week social media campaign. We sent out mailers and decals, and we even created a Ricky the Recycling Ranger program where we had a local student record videos with the help of our information office and our PAM office. And, that was very well received. I believe they received rewards for that program. And my staff and I, and along with several commissioners, several of you, went out and actually met with various residents and various HOAs to provide information about the program and help to educate on reducing contamination and helping us to improve the quality of our materials and reducing the costs. We are currently doing multifamily and commercial audits. We have provided all our accounts with education and recycling information. Unfortunately, our audits continue to indicate excessive contamination. As you can see, 75% of the containers that we continue to audit are showing excessive contamination. To date, 62% of the multifamily recycled dumpsters that were in the program have been removed due to excessive contamination. Audits of our commercial and single-family residential accounts certainly suggest the same type of trends in regards to contamination. We have conducted 4 audits within Century Village, and the average of those audits indicate an average contamination rate of 57%. Next slide, please.
Yeah, just briefly, can you just talk a little bit about what you do to audit the materials, as well as what you do from the residential side?
Sure. So on the multifamily and commercial side, those are dumpster service. So we have a individual in our staff that goes out and looks within those containers. We'll audit that material, determine whether or not that material has excessive contamination or greater than 10% contamination. Every time that individual is on site, he attempts to make contact with a property representative to provide information, to provide education. Information is placed on that container to provide information to those individuals. And again, if we do find excessive contamination over 3 audit events, we remove that excessive contamination container out of the program. From the residential side, we're able to utilize data that is provided to us from Waste Management and go out and field verify that information is accurate. And you will see from some slides later on that basically the entire city, from what we're seeing from a curbside perspective, is exhibiting excessive contamination. Does that help, Dave?
Thank you.
Yes. Next slide, please. So the trends that we're seeing really is that, the industry is in flux. It's still trying to adapt. There are some signs, positive signs pre-COVID-19 that there were some changes coming. However, now with COVID-19, there's a lot more uncertainty, obviously. What we are obviously seeing is the recycling costs continue to rise. And, this is not specific to Deerfield Beach. This is something that's happening everywhere where, there are communities that are entering new processing contracts are seeing increases. The material values continue to be volatile and are trending down, unfortunately. Cardboard, metal, and some plastics do continue to retain some market value. So that's something that we've seen sustained over this period. just prior to COVID-19, some of my staff went to a recycling workshop where there was a variety of communities together and discussed this issue. And one of the things that they found is that Miami-Dade County, which has an extremely large education outreach budget in excess of $300,000, they put out a program. They had all sorts of mailers, and they had information on the buses, the bus stops. They had radio outreach, so on and so forth. Every part potential outreach that you could do, they did. And unfortunately, they actually saw their contamination rates increase by approximately 11%. So there is some evidence that suggests that, education outreach has some marginal impact. And when you look at those costs, you need to look to see whether or not those are going to offset any value that you see in a reduction in contamination. You will see later in this presentation that contamination rates continue to increase. And the market indicators that we're seeing obviously suggest that things are going to get worse. And there really is no specific end that we see in the foreseeable future. One recent notice that we received from Waste Management, which I'll, if we can go to the next slide, please, shows the market volatility that we're seeing. So mixed paper, your mailer paper, your office paper, that's something that we've always felt was recyclable and had value. However, in January of earlier this year, we received notice from Waste Management that basically indicated, because of the value or the lack of value in the mixed paper, that it was going to be considered residue or contamination or garbage, and it would be subject to the contamination fee. Literally the next month, we received notice from Waste Management that they were changing that, and that the mixed paper would continue to be in the program. And as you can see to the right, just again to highlight the volatility, just from March to April, mixed paper increased by $15 a ton. And what we understand is that is attributable to COVID-19 and the fact that there is increased demand for tissue and paper products domestically. So we don't believe that's going to be a sustained increase, but again, there's high market volatility on every one of these commodities. Next slide, please. This table, and I'm sure it's probably very difficult for you to see, so I just wanted to go through this table real quick. These are the variety of data points that we collect in regards to our recycling program. So we look at tons collected, we look at the cost per ton, we look at our total monthly cost, we look at our contamination rates, we look at what the cost would be to dispose of this material as solid waste, and we look at what tipping fee avoidance would be there if it existed. And you'll see later on in this presentation that we are beyond the point of any tipping fee avoidance at this point. Next slide. So this is a slide illustrating how many tons we collect. So this is program-wide. This includes commercial, multifamily, residential, everything. So on average, we're collecting approximately 541 tons a month, or approximately 6,500 tons annually. And you can see the trend line is fairly flat, maybe trending up a little bit, but it's fairly consistent. Next slide.
Just real quick.
Sure.
I just want the commission to know, and that the slide previously was obviously a lot of information on one slide. All these slides that you're going to see here is a breakdown of this information in a little bit more manageable way. So it's all consolidated there for you, but this breaks it down just a little bit. Thanks.
Absolutely. Thank you, Mr. City Manager. Next slide, please. So when you look at the tonnage by segment, you can see the lion's share of the materials that we collect are in the curbside segment. So this is the carted segment of our city. Obviously, these numbers are pre-COVID. What we have seen since the safer at home orders have been issued, obviously a significant increase in residential materials in the neighborhood of 20% increase for both curbside materials as well as bulk materials. So if anything, the curbside materials would be a greater percentage when you're talking about where we're at today in this COVID situation. Next slide, please. So when you look at our contamination rates, again, as I told you, this is not something specific to Deerfield Beach. We had asked Waste Management to provide us with contamination rates for the other communities that they provide services for. You could see the line of the 10% limit that's allowed by the contract. You could see on the left, we're looking at July 2019. On the right, we're looking at January 2020, and over that 6-month period, we have seen an average increase of approximately 10% of everybody. And you can see we're sort of in the middle, trending on the higher end, but our numbers are certainly in line with some of these other communities within Broward County. Next slide. So when you look at Deerfield specific contamination, if you look left to right, you see the green bar. The green bar is our aggregate prior to the implementation of the DFB 2.0 program. And, there was an initial dip, and we certainly attribute that to the significant education and outreach efforts that were done. However, you again can see the threshold line of 10%, and we are still significantly above that line. Obviously, that number and those numbers, you can see the trend line is unfortunately trending up. That's again something that's been consistent throughout Broward County. Next slide. So this is a map of the various areas throughout the city where we have identified, basically the citywide, that we are seeing excessive contamination. There is not one residential area within the city that is at or below that 10% threshold. Next slide, please. When you look at our net cost per ton, what we're actually paying, and again, it's important to understand what makes that number up. So there's a lot of variables that go into that. So number one, it's the amount of material that we're delivering. It's the processing fees that we pay. It's the contamination rate of those materials that are delivered. And it's the value of those materials that are within what we are delivering. So as you can see, there is significant volatility in regards to the numbers. Now, what you can also see is there is very good correlation in regards to the various contamination caps that were in place. So between September 2018 to February 2019, there was an 18% maximum cap on contamination. And you can see, obviously, that those net costs were significantly lower than the next period, which was a 26% contamination cap. And then today, from September 19 to today, we are paying the actual contamination costs for these materials. And obviously, the trend line is on an exponential growth curve there. Next slide, please. Along with the net cost, basically the monthly cost is just the net cost multiplied by the number of tons, or the amount of tons that we deliver. And obviously, as the net cost goes up, we would anticipate the monthly cost to go up as well. So as of last month, we were paying approximately $47,000 to process our recyclable materials. Next slide, please.
Chad, can I ask a question? So we paid how much last month to process our recyclable materials?
$47,338.
How much of that was actually recycled?
Well, because of our contamination rate, less than approximately 50%, but most likely less than 50%.
Okay.
And Chad, can you elaborate a little bit on that? What you mean by probably less than 50%?
Well, again, there's a contamination rate of 49%. So basically half of the materials that we are sending to the facility are outright being considered contamination. Once they make it to the end processing facility, ultimately those materials have to be sold. And if there's no market for those materials would be, disposed of as waste. So, there is a possibility that greater than that 49% is not being recycled.
Thank you. And if I can go just one step further, and that's exactly what was happening with paper and why Waste Management initially made that determination to remove that material from the waste stream, because they couldn't get rid of it. They could not, there was no market for it whatsoever. And they just had stockpiles of this material sitting on pallets that they couldn't do anything with. And I think ultimately, correct me if I'm wrong, Chad, ultimately what they decided to do after there was a lot of public outcry about removing paper from the waste stream, was that they said, okay, well, we'll bring it to the incinerator, and at least in that way it can be counted towards recycling credit.
Yep, that's correct. And as I indicated earlier, now mixed paper is selling at $12.50 a ton. So, obviously there is a market for it at the moment. So that material is going to be recycled. Next slide, please. So earlier on in the presentation, I talked about tipping fee avoidance. And again, recycling, there were two reasons predominantly why recycling was implemented, to reduce costs and to increase revenues, and obviously, the environmental factors as well. And what this slide shows is that for the first several months when our rates were low because of the contamination cap, and possibly because of the value of the materials was higher, we were actually still better off processing this material than sending it to be disposed of as garbage. Starting in March, obviously that trend flipped over, and now the net difference between us sending this material to be processed is now more expensive than it would be to dispose of this material as garbage. And you can see that those numbers have gone up and are trending up. Next slide, please. So, what efforts are being done to address this global issue? And unfortunately, there is no silver bullet. There is no easy solution. These issues really have been happening behind the scenes for quite some time. The China situation really masked some issues with the global recycling industry for quite a period of time, and it's going to take some time to get out of this situation. It's going to require some domestic investment to build recycling capacity here in the United States, and again, that's not going to happen overnight. Obviously, this global pandemic that we are all in has created even more uncertainty. This has created even a greater cloud on what is going to happen to the recycling industry in the near future. There are several long-term efforts underway. There was a meeting on Monday with representatives of the Broward County Working Group looking at possibly reforming a county coalition of the county cities to work together to identify potential solid waste and recycling solutions. The reality of that is it's going to take several years to put that in place. And eventually, obviously, it's going to take capital to build those facilities, to purchase those properties. So those options are off several years. Public-private partnerships are certainly something that the city can look into. Obviously, again, those aren't going to happen overnight. Those are certainly opportunities we can continue to explore. But again, that's going to require investment, and it will take time. Obviously, there are technologies that are emerging to address these recycling challenges. I don't know if you've seen the news in regards to a new enzyme that they're looking at that eats recyclables. So, that's promising, but again, that's not something that is ready for market at the moment. So that's several years away. So what are our short-term options? If you can go to the next slide, please. So obviously the first option would be we don't change anything. And obviously the pro would be, we continue business as usual. There's several cons to that, unfortunately, because of, as you've seen in the presentation, the costs continue to go up. We really have no idea when those costs will stabilize, if they will stabilize. There is significant month-to-month variability on these materials. Again, that's driven by the volume, driven by contamination rate, contributed by the value of the commodity. And this is something that is very difficult to project from a financial standpoint. And case in point, last year, we looked at trending and we did our best to budget a $50 per ton estimate on what recycling would cost for processing. And today we're at $95.44 a ton. And that's going to result in a projected amount of approximately $245,000 over our budget. Some considerations, if we were to continue the program as is, certainly additional enforcement, additional education. But, as the city manager alluded to, the lion's share of these materials is not being recycled. So we're paying a premium for materials that ultimately at least half, are ending up into a landfill or a municipal solid waste disposal location. Next slide, please. Obviously, a second option would be to suspend the program. The pros to this option, obviously, we would have fixed pricing. We know what we pay for the disposal of garbage. It's currently at $42.70 a ton, which is half the price of what we're currently paying to process our recyclables. And then we know, because we've done this before, that there would be operational savings by reducing and consolidating routes and collecting everything as municipal solid waste. Obviously, the cons, the program would be suspended, and we all remember the public reaction to that. I certainly remember it, and I'm sure many of you do as well. The financial impact of that, obviously, again, if you were looking at a considerable savings from the processing side and the operational side of approximately $474,000. One of the things that could be considered is we do have an excellent recycling drop-off center. And I know this is something that is done in other communities and other locations, not necessarily in Florida, but in other rural communities. And I've seen it in areas up north where residents, there is no curbside recycling program where residents go to a regional drop-off center and they bring their recyclables to that center. That is an alternative that we have here. It's a viable alternative where the understanding is that individuals that are really going to recycle right are going to take the effort to come to the drop-off center, and ultimately that would reduce contamination and reduce the cost, obviously, of the program. The curbside program could be reinstituted, obviously, at any time, but it would be something that we would recommend only be done when the value of the materials is showing sustained increase over time. Basically when the industry is stabilized and we know that we're at a point where it's going to make financial sense to continue to move in that direction. Obviously, under this program, there would be no contamination. There would be no value of the materials. It just basically be a flat price. Next slide. And speaking of flat rate pricing, there is an option where we could go out and do a solicitation to see if there is opportunities in the market where, instead of being subject to the value of the materials and contamination, that we just pay a flat rate for the processing of our materials. It's possible that those rates would come in less than what we're currently paying. Obviously, the cons to that, there would be some implementation to develop that solicitation, to issue it, and to review the rewards. And of course, there's no guarantees. There's no guarantees that we would receive responses, and there's no guarantees that the pricing would be below what we're currently paying. based on some very preliminary market research, and we're very fortunate in our department to have some folks that have worked in the private sector and have, upwards of 50 years of experience combined. They believe, and again, this is all pre-COVID, that there could be an opportunity to see some savings if we were to go in this direction. Additionally, there could be a bid alternate added to that solicitation to allow for the materials to be taken to an incinerator, where under current state guidelines, you would receive the 100% recycling credit. Next slide, please. Option four. Option four would be to basically remove all materials other than those materials that have shown a sustained value, which would be aluminum and cardboard. There are some plastics that have shown some sustained value, but we believe if we would to continue to keep plastic in the program, it would continue to confuse individuals as to what plastics have value, which plastics don't. So ultimately, we would recommend simplifying the program to those two items. And obviously, there would be some potential for operational savings due to the reduced materials. Contamination rates may be initially higher as individuals try to get accustomed to the program. And like a lot of these options, we do our best to provide projections and estimates using existing data. But the reality is that information changes monthly. And as I indicated, it's going to be based on volume. It's going to be based on contamination rate. It's going to be based on the value of that material. So it's going to be difficult to assess what the impact of those modifications had been until we implement that program, if we decide to do it. With all that said, we have utilized this data, and we do anticipate that there would be a processing savings that would come in anywhere from $200,000, potentially more. As I mentioned, other considerations, we would need to expand our education outreach. There are no guarantees on this. As I indicated, the actual savings would be highly dependent upon individuals adhering to the program. And again, ultimately dependent on the market conditions, which nobody can predict. Next slide, please. One of the options that was discussed and requested in the past was, what if we went back to dual stream, where we had the blue and the yellow cards? And the reality here is that in 2012, the city made the commitment to move to a single stream program. And that program, from an efficiency standpoint, we went from collections of approximately 80 homes per hour to where we are today to approximately 127 homes per hour. So the single stream collection process is significantly more efficient. We have been able to drop 4 collection routes because of that. However, the pros of the dual stream program is that typically you would see cleaner material because those materials are segregated. You would see reduced contamination fees. The cons, obviously, we would need to purchase new collection vehicles to go back to that type of service. Significant cost for that. Additionally, there would be a significant cost to purchase all of the bins for all the residents throughout the city. From an operational standpoint, as I indicated, it's a less efficient collection process. It poses safety issues for our drivers and our collectors because now they're, instead of just utilizing the arm to tip the cart, they have to exit the cab and pick up sometimes heavy containers. And you would see, I would guess, an increase in risk and workers' compensation claims and those types of things. Furthermore, when the bins are out in the weather, obviously they would be exposed to rain and wind, and that would impact the value of those materials. And obviously, when we do have heavy winds here, those materials would blow out of those containers and create mess throughout the neighborhood. The financial impact, as I indicated, the significant capital costs would be needed. Processing costs would anticipate to be lower due to the higher quality material. However, there's no guarantee that those costs are going to be significantly less than what we're currently paying to offset the significant capital investment that would be needed. Additionally, efforts should be made to procure with a facility that would maximize the fact that we are dual source separating at the curb. Next slide, please. Our last option, and it's an A and a B, would be to look at adjusting our collection frequency. Obviously, if we reduce how many times we're going out and collecting these materials, we would see an operational cost savings. However, initially there would be confusion in regards to the various schedule changes. Initially, we would anticipate some containers that would overflow, and ultimately we may need to upsize the various recycling containers to larger capacity containers to address the reduction in frequency of collection. And additionally, changing these schedules would present some challenges with staff. Obviously, we would figure it out, but that is also a potential con. The operational savings, they would be there. Obviously, if we were to go to a monthly collection, there would be higher operational savings. And the two considerations there would be a bi-monthly or a monthly collection. Next slide, please. So this slide endeavors to look at the potential cost impacts of the various options I just went through. So if we look at the first option, and again, I want to highlight the notes here. We are looking at just the residential. I don't know if somebody else has got that popped up on their screen, the reminder. No, it's just me, sorry. What we're looking at is just residential volumes. So for approximately 4,500 tons of material. The processing figures are projections and estimates utilizing the best existing data that we have. Again, the actual figures are going to be dependent upon what the actual value of the material is, which fluctuates every month, the contamination rates, which also will fluctuate, and obviously how much material we are delivering to the facility. So under option one, we would be paying a processing cost of approximately $429,000. The operating costs are approximately $362,000 for a total cost of $791,000. Under option two, which would be to suspend the program, we would see a significant savings in the processing cost because we'd be going to that flat $43.70 cost. We would see some operational savings that we had seen when we suspended the program in the summer of 2018. So you're looking at a total cost there for that option of approximately $317,000, which is a net decrease of approximately $474,000 versus the current program. The third option rather is the flat rate solicitation. Again, the processing charges would be highly contingent upon what actual rates come in if we were to put out a solicitation. We had utilized a number of $75 per ton. It could be higher than that. It could be lower. We don't know unless we put this out to bid. The operating cost would be the same. The total cost would be approximately $700,000, which would be approximately a $91,000 cost reduction versus the current. The fourth option is again to modify the program materials to just look at aluminum and cardboard. And here, the estimate we used for the processing cost would be approximately $56 a ton. So you're looking at $252,000 for the processing, $362,000, same for operating costs, for a total cost of $614,000, for a possible savings of approximately $177,000. Option 5 is the dual stream. We utilized a processing cost of approximately $50 per ton here. So you can see there would be a savings of processing. The cost would be approximately $225,000. Operating costs we would again expect to go up due to a less efficient collection process. So those costs would go to approximately $724,000 for a total cost of just shy of $1 million. And then you will see the significant capital that would be needed to reinstitute the dual stream program. So to reinstitute that program, the first year costs would be approximately $2.9 million over what we're currently paying. The second option is 6A and 6B, the two options here, rather. Again, it's very difficult to project what the processing costs would be. Ultimately, it is possible that those costs would go down. Obviously, the operating costs would go down in both of these scenarios. So you're looking at a total cost here of approximately $670,000 for the biweekly, $550,000 for the monthly. But again, we would fully expect that individuals would need to upsize their carts. Currently, most residents have a 65-gallon cart. If you're not going to be getting the weekly collection, we would expect folks would need a larger cart. And the cost to do that citywide, we're projecting approximately $850,000 in capital for those new bins and those new carts. So if you look at the cost there, option A would be approximately $729,000 more than current, and option B would be approximately $608,000 more than current. Next slide, please.
Chad, if you can go back a little bit, I would like to, well, actually, I think you can, no, go back to this one. Yes, thank you. Sorry, prior. Yeah, thanks. Sorry. Couple of things that I do want to chime in on these various options, if I may. With the flat rate option, the market was not very receptive to our solicitations when we put these out last time. Definitely not as good as it was in the past. Not that there are a lot of players down here in South Florida anyway, but frankly, I'm not sure if the solicitation would get any bids. And I'm not sure, you got to remember with the volatility of the market, I'm just not sure what that hedge would look like from a bid perspective, because they would have to be bidding for some sort of long-term rate. And we've already explained the market conditions that we live in right now. So that's one of my concerns with the flat rate one. But from a budgetary standpoint, it would certainly be helpful to know what your rate's going to be and to be able to budget appropriately, year after year to meet your mark there. The modification of the materials, quite frankly, is interesting to me, because we know that there are certain commodities that are doing better than others. And we know that there are certain commodities that lend themselves to more contamination than others, i.e. the paper and the plastic. And then, I think the dual stream option is worth consideration. And of course, that's why we're providing it. But the thing to consider there is we're not sure if there's even a place in Broward County to take a dual stream, take the dual stream on the back end. At the end of the day, taking recycled materials to where we're taking them today would be just the same, but the processing benefit of the dual stream infrastructure only exists in West Palm and not down here. So we're just not sure if we get as much bang for our buck with the dual stream as they probably do up in West Palm Beach, or Palm Beach County, I should say. And then when it comes to the biweekly or the monthly collection, Chad made the assumption, and rightfully so, that it just makes mathematical sense that if you're getting once a week recycling pickup and you change that to every other week or once a month, then you'll collect and accumulate just that much more material. And so you would need a bigger cart. But that's under the assumption that residential curbside collection has a full cart every week, right? So that may be the case, but it may also be the case that we don't have. Maybe some people have a quarter of their cart full. You see what I'm saying? So the need for an increased size cart may exist for some and not others. And so the capital costs there may not be as big as we're presenting them, but we want to show you some conservative figures. Additionally, the biweekly or the monthly collection, knowing that you're only going to get that picked up every other week, every month, may lend itself to the consumer being more cognizant of what they're throwing in the can, because they know they can only fit so much. But, you know, we're talking about, you know, consumer reaction to things that we're yet to see. So just some points I want to make on some of these options. And also, not to convolute it any further than it is with these, you know, 6 options that you have in front of you, but you could also look at a biweekly collection with a reduction or a modification of the materials. You know, there's a lot of different things that we can do here. And I'll let Chad move over to the next slide as I continue.
Well, before we do, Dave, if I could just throw something out while we're on this slide, and Commissioner Grosky, I apologize. I saw that I know your hand was raised earlier. You have a question. And I know we only have 10 minutes left of what we had allotted for this workshop. But I just want to, this slide's important for this idea that I'm going to come up with here. An option 7 would be that, because option 6, whether it's A or B, doesn't go towards what most people recycle for, and that is the fact of making sure that the material is being reused, protecting our environment, and trying to make sure that we have reusable products. So 6 in any format doesn't attack that at all, and it doesn't do anything about contamination. It just cuts down on our operating costs. But if we were to take option number 4 and you combine it with option number 6, because the real cost in option number 4, which is to modify the materials, limit what we're actually using or recycling, and you maybe do a bi-weekly or monthly program, you're going to be taking in less materials because you're not taking everything. You modify the materials you're taking in, which we see is a cost savings, and we're really only recycling the products that we know are highly likely to be recyclable or have a value aftermarket. And we're doing so the amount we're taking in is less. That would allow for us to go bi-weekly or even monthly, which would reduce our operating costs. So a hybrid of 4 and 6 would give us probably what we're looking for, operational cost savings, as well as the ability to be able to recycle the material, which is in the end what most of us want to do. That's an option that I would like us to consider as well. And with that, and Chad, I'm going to let you finish your, I see Commissioner Hudak has his hand raised. We'll go with Commissioner Hudak, and then we can move forward from there unless somebody else has a comment. Commissioner Hudak?
Thank you very much, sir. You've read my mind. Personally, I think option 4 and 6, using both of those, we would not need the new capital investment. But even with option 4, I've said this every time this subject has come up. And the point being is I think we need to simplify recycling. Start with just one product. Recycle only aluminum. And once the citizens get that down pat, then if you want to expand it to cardboard, go ahead and do that. But I think we just got to get back down to the basics. Start with option 4, recycle just aluminum. Do it on a bi-weekly basis. And once we get those contamination rates where we see that they need to be, then we can expand the program again. But, you know, if we just stick with what we're doing, you know, that's the definition of insanity.
Okay. Thank you. We're not taking anything from the public right now. We're going to go through, let me finish presentations. We'll take public comment at the end. Go ahead, Chad. Sorry.
No problem. Thank you, Mayor. And I apologize. I did not know that I was going a little long here. So I will finish up fairly quickly. Next slide, please. So this is just a summary of the various options. I really don't need to go into that much more. It's just the same information presented on one single slide, and it's probably very hard for you to read. So next slide, please. So in summary, obviously the recycling industry is changing. Once we were getting revenue, now the processing is costing twice the cost to dispose of the materials as garbage. Rates continue to increase from contamination side. This is something we're seeing citywide. This is something we're seeing countywide. Global trends certainly have suggested we have not seen the worst. We have not hit the bottom. And obviously we have not seen the impacts of COVID-19 yet, I don't believe. There are no easy solutions. There is no win-win-win. If there was, we certainly would have done it by now. And it's going to take many years before we see a sustained improvement where we can get back to where we were with getting revenue for our recycling programs. As I mentioned, there are long-term options that we are exploring. And as you have seen, there are some short-term options that do exist. So with that, that is the end of my presentation, and I'd be happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Commission, does anyone have any questions? Do you have any hand? I don't see any hands raised. Commissioner Drosky. And if you could be unmuted, please, Madam Clerk.
Better?
Yes, that's much better.
Okay. My first question is, Mr. Gressick, who determines what is contamination? I know you went through how we as a city internally audit our recycling, but who with our processor, how is that determination made? What is contamination and what is not? And the follow-up to that is, what are we doing to ensure that those contamination rates are accurate?
Great question, and thank you. So, there is a very, very detailed process that waste management partakes in regards to going through this material. We actually have overseen that process on several occasions. It's very detailed. They have the materials, they break them out into different containers and different bins, and they basically, classify the materials based on the commodity aspect. So, when you have paper that comes in soaking wet, obviously that's going to be considered contaminated material. When you have plastics that are not considered acceptable in our program, when you have plastic bags. So all that material is hoses, wires. You would be amazed of some of the materials that people put in the recycling bin that they believe is recyclable. And obviously they have the best intentions in the world, but ultimately that is hurting the program. So there is a very detailed process that waste management does do regularly when they receive our material. And as I indicated, we have overseen that process. It is very involved and very detailed. In regards to your second question, as I indicated, we do audits. We do audits on all of our commercial and multifamily facilities. And when we receive data from waste management, we utilize that data and we verify that information out in the field with our drivers, with our supervisors, and that information that is provided on those reports from waste management is absolutely consistent with what we're seeing out in the field.
Okay, I don't have any other questions. I may have some comments if we have time at the end, but I don't have any other questions.
Okay, Commissioner Preston.
I would have liked to see at the end of the presentation some sort of a recommendation and why. What in thought would have been the best for the city, and here's why that is. So here's what I will ask, Chad, in your opinion, which of the 6 options would be the best for the city and our residents, and why?
Wow. This is a very, very difficult decision. And you know, this presentation is taking a lot of time to put together a lot of these options. You know, there's a lot of uncertainty in these options. I do think, in my opinion, the approach that was recommended by the mayor is a sound approach. It addresses the issues that we're dealing with. It addresses the contamination, and it addresses operational costs. So I think those are valid options. Every one of these are valid options. If they were not, I certainly would not put them forward. But ultimately, this is a decision to be made by the city commission. We are seeking your input and your feedback. Obviously, the public's feedback and input, and ultimately, you know, you use that information to look into these options further.
But my question was to you, which of the 6 did you think was going to be the best and why? Now, if you're saying that the suggestion by the mayor is now the best, then I can accept that. But if you have an opinion beyond that, I want to hear it. And I want to know why it would be the best for our residents, and why would it be the best for the city to engage. So if you're telling me now that what Mayor Gantz came up with is the best method, and that we should actually pursue that, then I'm okay. You don't have to answer. Is that what you're saying?
Actually, Commissioner, I'd like to answer that if I can. And what I'll say is, at the end of the day, really what it comes down to is what is the level of service that the city commission wants to provide to the residents as it relates to the recycling program. And then it's our job to ensure that we understand the costs involved with doing that. And so with the understanding of what the service level what we want the service level to be, and I think generally what I've heard, not just today, but whenever we've had recycling conversations, is that we want to do the best that we can with recycling. And so I think what we need to do is realize that we want to maintain a recycling program, but we also have to come to the realization that what we're doing today is not working for all of the reasons Chad was able to articulate tonight. And we want to still provide our residents with the comfort that what they're putting in their blue bin is actually still getting recycled. And so I think for those reasons, I think that hybrid approach should be something that we can take a closer look at and really crunch some numbers. And we'd be happy to get back with the city commission on some more information on it.
Okay.
Commissioner Hudak?
Thank you, sir. So Chad, if we did option 2, and that is eliminating the recycling plan, how many drivers is that going to affect? And what would we do with those drivers?
Great question, Commissioner. So we would anticipate a reduction of 1 collection route, and certainly that driver would be reabsorbed in the operation in some manner. You know, certainly we would not anticipate any type of layoff of that. That individual would be, as I said, reabsorbed into the program.
Okay, good. I'm very glad to hear that, because I definitely don't want to adversely affect anybody's employment if we can help it. And again, I'm a definite proponent of option 6A and option 4, you know, combining those two. But I'm also strongly recommending that we look at, you know, starting with one recycling product, you know, make it aluminum, and let's get people educated on what it is with the one product. And then if we can expand it to cardboard, we expand it to cardboard. But I just, you know, feel that we really need to take a step back in order to make this a long-term viable option. Are there any other cities within our area that have chosen the flat rate option that you're aware of?
No, Commissioner. I know prior to COVID-19, there was a survey that was sent out to the various communities in Broward County in regards to what they were going to do with their recycling program. I do not know, what the update of that is, whether or not those workshops occurred. So I don't have any specific information on anybody else that's doing that at this time.
And the last question I have is the termination clause for our current contract. Are there any penalties if we alter our contract or change it in any way?
Obviously, that's something we'll have to delve into a little bit more with the help of legal. Obviously, to terminate the contract, there's a 90-day termination. However, I do believe there's options for either party to modify the materials as long as significant notice is provided.
Thank you, sir.
Samantha, if we could unmute the city attorney.
Thank you. Thank you for the question, Commissioner Hudak. When we negotiated the agreement, it does allow for modifications to the waste streams. So that was contemplated that you would have the ability to withdraw waste streams from that contract without penalty. As far as termination of that contract, I believe it's 90 days notice. There's no penalty. You just have to provide the proper written notice.
No more further questions.
Thank you. I'm not seeing any other hands raised. We'll go to the public. We have one person's hand raised. Dan?
Yes, hi. This is Dan Hers, 330 Southeast 19th Avenue. I hope you can hear me okay.
Yes, sir.
Thank you. I want to thank Mr. Gressick for his presentation, and a lot of what he said back in the summer of 2018 has come true with regards to the contamination rates. And I feel that it's very interesting that, if I understood him correctly, that half of the items that we think are getting recycled are not because of the contamination rate, which is a startling figure. So as a result of that, if half of it isn't getting recycled to begin with, I think it's necessary to at least take a long, hard look at option number 2, which would obviously save the taxpayers $500,000 a year, but with the caveat that you still have the ability to have people still take the recyclables to a processing center so that those that wish to participate still have the option of doing that, especially if they knew that, again, that half of what they thought was getting recycled was not at all. Also, just as clarification, I know Mr. Gressick had said back in 2018 that the operational savings alone of discontinuing recyclables would have been about $800,000 annually. And I don't know if you're still using that figure in your calculations for this time around, but I think it's necessary to at least have a discussion about the fiduciary responsibility of the commissioners to try to save money wherever possible, especially in this COVID environment. And if we have the possibility of saving $500,000 a year and giving the citizens an option of where to take their recyclables, it's something that at least needs to be discussed and considered highly. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you. We have Dean.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. This is Dean Cowan, 3250 Southwest 2nd Court in Deerfield. Mr. Mayor, one thing you brought up was combining the two. I think that's a great idea about stepping out and making some concessions. But I also believe that that could be done in a different way, starting with a suspension of the recycle program, one, till this passes and we can get back into not only having some revenue back into our city, but having our citizens back to work, doing what they can, and then putting it out there and choosing what's going to be the most profitable thing to start with. I have family that has a scrap metal business up north, and they rotate what they take in and when and what they hold on to, knowing and looking at market trends. Right now, we don't have a market trend, but we're spending a lot of money on something that's really getting thrown away. So when I looked at all the options with you, realistically, suspension right now to say maybe for 6 months to reevaluate where we're at, and then come back to more educating of people of starting with one thing. What's the most profitable thing that the city could do, and building upon it from there, instead of jumping into all other situations, and then also combining 4 and 6 as you have brought up. But you got to understand, people, they're not going to think it through when they're putting stuff in. That's why we have so much contamination. My wife is an avid person for recycling. She knows it inside and out, but she has also gotten frustrated on the fact of what you can and can't do per whatever is allowed and not allowed at any given time. We got to do it in a more methodical way where people want to do it rather than just feel like they have to. And also the fact that we have a place to take recycling right now is beneficial during a suspended period rather than just, saying, okay, let's make another change. I think we could utilize our money a lot better. And also, as the other commissioner brought up, no one's going to lose a job. They're going to be able to be absorbed doing other things. We don't want anyone to get out of work. I know what that feels like. So we want to make sure that we're, cognizant on what people are doing and when. But for me, that number 2 option for temporary, and then your combination of 4 and 6 seem like the most practical way to reestablish a recycle program within our city. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else from the public? I don't see any other hands raised. I'll give it a moment. I'm going to go ahead and close it to the public. I think the combination of 4 and 6, or number 2, eliminating it entirely, at least in the temporary, are the only options, in my opinion, that make any sense. And it might make sense to suspend it like we did previously. And we got the public's attention when we did that. We caught a lot of heat. Yes, we did. A lot of people were very upset because it's the one thing that's not being considered with item number 2 or suggestion number 2 is that the vast majority of well, that's, some people's individual opinion. The vast majority of the people we heard from were very upset that we stopped recycling altogether. The majority of the people in the city of Deerfield Beach want to recycle. They might not know how to do it properly, and it seems that at least 50% of them don't know how to do it properly. But the problem is you might have great people on your block that everybody does it right, but all it takes are 1 or 2 houses on that same block to contaminate. It's not about the can itself. It's about the truckload that it goes into. It doesn't take much to contaminate that entire truckload. So this new catchword of contamination is something that they've got a lot of control over, and it really hurts us. And here's the truth of the matter. We are now seeing what many people have suggested over the years, is that recycling in many ways is a scam. This industry itself is not a fun one to deal with. I've been around since the beginning when we had the Resource Recovery Board with the county. In my opinion, that whole thing was a racket. The tipping fees were outrageous. That's why we went with an upstart when it was Sun Bergeron, because we saved $20 a ton on tipping just by putting competition in the marketplace. So it's very frustrating to see how this has gone, but there's still some value to recycling. People still want to do it. So my suggestion is if we can go to a combination of 4 and 6, and potentially do a temporary number 2 suggestion, which would be the suspension of it as we come up with 4 and 6 to stop any hemorrhaging of money. That would make the most sense. If we were to suspend it, I do like the idea of just keeping our recycling center open for people who know how to do it, want to do it right, and want to come there. That makes sense. But I think long-term eliminating entirely is not something that people want to do. And as long as there's still a value to it, and just to clarify one comment that was made, none of this is profitable. Is that correct, Mr. Gressick?
Yeah, I mean, when you look at the cost of collection versus what you're actually getting, yeah, there's no value at this point.
Right. Thank you, Commissioner Drosky.
Thank you, Mayor. This is not an easy decision any way that you slice it. To me, this is a balance between economic stewardship and environmental stewardship. And there has to be a balance between the two. But I know what doesn't work is what we're doing right now. We are hemorrhaging money right now, and it doesn't work. And what I also know is that unfortunately, the education doesn't work nearly as well as we thought it would either. That's just a harsh reality, and I'm going to say it like it is. I mean, I went to many homeowners association meetings and did a lot of the public outreach, and we had the initial dip in the contamination rate, but as you saw by the chart, it went right back up, and it's gone actually even higher. The state of Florida, has a 30% on average contamination rate, and here in the city of Deerfield Beach, we're averaging 43%. So what we think, or what people may think is being recycled, is not. It's actually going to the processing center, and then it is ending up in the landfill as contamination. And in fact, when you're doing that, to take it from your curb to the processing center, and then from the processing center to the landfill, you've actually doubled the carbon footprint of that material. So you're actually creating a worse environmental situation than you are just by recycling it. So there's no easy answer to this. With the whole COVID-19 situation and the reduction of the worldwide oil supply, it is far cheaper to use virgin plastic than the recycled resin. And all of the economists and all the reports that I read basically said that that's not going to change in the foreseeable future anytime soon. So that ties into the economic stewardship. We cannot continue to pay $95.44 a ton on average, which is twice the garbage rate that we're paying. So there's got to be some balance. I, like the mayor, got all the emails and the phone calls too when this situation came out, when we suspended our program. And the one thing that I've learned for sure is that our residents were very adamant that they wanted a recycling program. But I don't think they want a recycling program where 50% of the material or more is being thrown into the landfill as garbage. And that's the balance that we have to strike. So as far as the options, option one, no change, is not really an option to me. But option 2, 4, and 6, those are certainly ones that we can play with and tweak. But the two things I know is that we do have to have some kind of recycling program here in the Deerfield Beach. That's what the residents want, but they're not going to pay for it to go into the landfill. And that's the dilemma we have to bridge.
Okay. I don't think anybody wants to be paying for being able to say, hey, I did something good, when they're not really doing something good. It's just a placebo effect. I've said this before. The all-in-one can is convenient, and it's a feel-good practice, but it's completely pointless if it's not being recycled. So I don't know. Are we looking for direction here, or is this something that's going to come up another commission meeting in which we can debate it a little bit differently, or is this just simply a workshop?
Thank you for that, Mayor. I think we've gotten enough general direction from the commission as a body to analyze the options that seem to have the most legs and come back to you with some a more concrete recommendation. And hopefully that would be something palatable to the city commission. We can bring that back at a city commission meeting. Excellent.
Okay. With that, is there any other comments from the commission? We're looking for a motion to adjourn. We have a motion to adjourn from Commissioner Preston. Second from Commissioner Hudak by him moving his mouth. I can't hear him, but I can see it. All in favor say aye.
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 Meeting adjourned. Thank you. Excellent job, Chad.
Thank you.